All right, everybody. Psalm 45 and 46 is going to be what we're looking at this morning. And I'll just remind us, for those of you who haven't been in any of these classes yet, that these are kind of class-directed discussions where on the material that's in the back, there's 4 questions that we're asking to every one of these psalms we're looking at. And so we just read the psalm and then we go through the questions that should help us understand and think more about making our own observations from Scripture. But psalm, there's going to be a couple times I'm out of town. Matt Finley's going to take lesson 5 and lesson 10, he just told me. And so I need to figure out for lesson 12 as well. But the elders have wanted us to do a 4-year plan on going through all of the Psalms every 4th quarter of the year. We're taking certain chunks of the Psalms until after 4 years we will have studied through all of them. And so we're in the middle of doing that, and we're looking at Psalms 45 and 46 tonight, both of which are actually some of the more famous Psalms, even though they're kind of wedged somewhere in the middle, and we might... This is where the famous one, "Be still and know that I am God," comes from in chapter 46. And we'll talk about the context of that in just a moment. But can anybody remind us how many books the book of Psalms is broken up into? There's 150 chapters. How many books are in it? 5. So, and the book tells us where these divisions are. And so we studied book 1 last year. We're looking at book 2 this year. Next year's books 3 and 4, and then in the next year, book 5. And we've been using Ephesians 5 as kind of a lens that we're looking at these Psalms through. We've been talking about the reasons people might want to drink alcohol, where he says, "Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit," addressing one another in psalms, and so on and so forth. Why do people get drunk, or why do people use substances? To escape things, to not have to deal with the difficulties of reality. And then this book is given to us, and it's showing people that deal with every human emotion. And rather than dulling their mind or resorting to escapism, here's how people dealt with their difficulties by processing their hardships and their trials and their joys all through the lens of God and how to serve Him. And so as we study these chapters, all of these things together come to show us many of the different emotions people experience and how to think about them properly. And so today we're going to look at some Psalms that deal, at least one of them, with joy. But any comments or questions just as we get started in this? All right, so Psalm 45, I titled this "The King and His Beauty," and here's the summary of this psalm. It's a royal wedding psalm celebrating the beauty and righteousness of a king. The psalm praises the king's role as a warrior and ruler and the splendor of his bride. It also carries prophetic images foreshadowing Christ and his relationship with the church as his bride. The psalm ends with a promise of enduring legacy in future generations, emphasizing the eternal nature of the king's reign. All right, so this psalm, and as we get into this, it may be a wedding psalm for King Solomon, not sure, but it has these overtones of talking ultimately about this king that everybody's looking forward to coming. And so verses 1 and 2 talk about his beauty, 3 through 9, his battles and his victories, and then 10 through 17 is going to emphasize his bride. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and read all of this psalm, and then we'll start out with the first question, what do you notice here? And then remember, the second question is, what do you wonder? What are you reminded of? And what prayers can you make? And if you don't have the material, I printed out extra copies of it, but we're just asking those 4 questions to all of these chapters. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 45. To the choir master, according to Lilies, a maskil of the sons of Korah, a love song. My heart overflows with a pleasing theme. I address my verse to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the most handsome of the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your splendor and majesty. In your majesty, ride out victoriously for the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness. Let your right hand teach you awesome deeds. Your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of the kingdom is a scepter of uprightness. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in the gold of Ophir. Hear, O daughter, and consider and incline your ear. Forget your people and your father's house, and the king will desire your beauty. Since he is your Lord, bow to him. The people of Tyre will seek your favor with gifts, the richest of the people. All glorious is the princess in her chamber, with robes interwoven with gold. In many-colored robes she is led to the king, with her virgin companions following behind her. With joy and gladness they are led along as they enter the palace of the king. In place of your fathers shall be your sons, and you will make them princes in all the earth. I will cause your name to be remembered in all the generations. Therefore nations will praise you forever and ever. All right. Let's start out with the first question. What do you notice here? Yeah, good. Yeah, like as this king is coming, like there's the smells and the sight and everything. It's like the beauty of this king and this whole ceremony is just overwhelming. Good. What else? Yeah, the imagery is really vivid here. It's not just generally stating things, but it's like the arrows in verse 5, sharp in the heart of the king's enemies, and then like this whole processional kind of thing that's happening. There'll be some interesting things to say about that as we go through this. Yeah.
Verse 6 verse 6 to 7, your throne, O God, is forever and ever.
Yep.
The scepter of your kingdom is the scepter of uprightness. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. This is directly from Hebrews chapter 1.
Yes.
The writer of Hebrews quoted that, and it says, chapter 1, verse 8, but of the Son, he as the Father.
Yes.
So that's just like.
Yes, so in Hebrews chapter 1, it's quoting Psalm 45, verses 6 and 7, and applying this psalm to Jesus. So this would be the ultimate fulfillment of this passage. Very good point. What else do you guys notice here? Yep.
Righteousness is the scepter, so his kingdom is going to be all about righteousness.
Yes, the kingdom is going to be filled with righteousness. You don't have to worry about this king having shady dealings under the table. You don't have to worry about him being bought and sold or controlled by somebody else or something like that. So one thing I see from this, then, is just the overall gladness when people have a righteous king. When there is a righteous ruler, what does that do for everybody that he rules over? It creates this gladness and this rejoicing, things like that. What else do you guys notice here? Yeah, and so all this adoration towards, okay, we've longed for a king like this, or we're so happy for this wedding that they're having right now, and we'll say more about that in just a moment. But one of the reasons that they'd be so glad is you shift from the beauty of the king to the military victories. He's not just this puppet that looks nice and like has nice hairdo and everything like that. He actually is proven himself in military conflict and has defeated enemies. And as he does this in verses 4 and 7, his cause is virtuous, going back to this idea that he's doing what's right for the nation, all of that. What else do you guys notice?
The fact that his throne is forever, there's no more re-elections or anything like that. He is the one.
Yeah, this is the one. And of course, in Psalm 45, in the original context, that could have been hyperbolic, like, oh, this is the one, but then he dies. Ultimately, this is talking about Jesus. There doesn't need to ever be a re-election or an incumbent. What else do you guys see? Yep.
In verse 4, it says that you have to ride out victoriously for the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness, let your right hand teach. You also lead. Reminds me of the triumphal entry. Jesus
Yeah, good.
rides in meekness.
Yeah, good. That's a good connection. In verse 4, when he rides in with meekness, it sounds a lot like the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So there's a lot of this kind of picture that you can see imported into the ministry of Jesus. One of the ones in this chapter that I think is especially interesting is verse 10. Look at verse 10. Hear, O daughter, and consider and incline your ear. Forget your people in your father's house. What does that mean? Who's he marrying? Yeah, kind of like in Genesis 24, like leave your relatives and come. It seems like this is talking about the king marrying a Gentile woman. Because then it goes on in verse 12, the people of Tyre seek your favor with gifts and riches. Why are the people of Tyre interested in this wedding? It could be because this is a woman of foreign descent that he's marrying. Does that sound at all a little bit like what Jesus has done? Yeah, how many of us are Jewish people? I don't think any of us are Jews. But we are spiritually the true Jewish people in the New Testament, as it would say that. But we're all ethnically non-Jewish, so we are all of foreign descent. And look at what Jesus has done for us ultimately. And this queen receives this honor in verse 12 with the people of Tyre. His beauty is being given to her, or because of his greatness and his beauty and his splendor, and she's marrying him, it's like she receives honor along with him because she's being exalted here. What else do you guys notice? Which, of course, is a picture of us. God has glorified his people, the church, the bride. He's sanctified us and set us apart, and he's cleaning us up. All these great pictures that we would see in Ephesians 5. What else do you guys notice? Yes. Yeah, good. Good. And notice also how this chapter begins and ends. In verse 1, my heart overflows with a pleasing theme. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. So this is the sons of Korah who wrote this. They're talking about themselves in verses 1 and then verse 17. Look down at verse 17. I will cause your name to be remembered in all generations, therefore nations will praise you forever and ever. So the sons of Korah say something about themselves at the beginning and the end of this. I want everybody to know about this. My tongue is like a ready scribe, and I have to describe to you all of these things that I'm seeing here. And that's just an interesting editorial thing that the writer does there. And then he goes on to give this great picture of this marriage. All right, let's look at this next question then. What do you wonder from this? What questions do you have from this? Oh, sorry. Yep.
Make one other observation. Verse 16, she's being asked to change her focus from her past to her future.
Yes.
To reemphasize that what comes next is more important than where she came from.
Yeah, good. And this is a very good point, that if this woman is from Gentile origins or something, this wedding day completely changes the focus of her whole life. In the place of your father shall be your sons. You're looking forward to having sons that are going to be princes now. What happens when somebody becomes a Christian? Are we supposed to be fixated on our past and where we came from, or where we're going now? And so there's that shift happening there. That's good. All right, what do you wonder? What questions do you guys have from this? Anything in here that you're like, what does that mean, or what's going on here? Yeah, you go first. That's fine. And then there's somebody else. It's fine. We're good.
Well, is the wedding representative of the church being presented to Christ in the end?
I think, yeah, so the question is could this be a picture of us ultimately being presented to Christ on the final day? And I think the trajectory of this would be giving us images of that and things that would stir our hope for that day. I think that would be a very appropriate way to look at it. Lily? I don't know if these are like other women that are not married yet that are looking forward to being married one day and they're happy for her, or if it's talking about Solomon and he had multiple wives. It's one of those. I'm not sure though. It could, but the emphasis seems to be on one woman, and these other ones are supporters of that woman. That's how I would read it. What were you gonna say, Matt?
Yeah, I wonder why the author uses the term God in verses 6 and 7 when referring to a human being king. He's using that term, but he's not talking immediate context about Yahweh. He's talking about a physical king that he is lauding over and praising that's right in front of him.
Yes.
I wonder why he uses the term God in that description of what he's physically looking at right now.
Yeah, it seems like it's the throne of God that at the second half of verse 7, therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your... So I think he's saying your God has done this, but it sounds like he's calling the guy God. Like, because it's God's throne, though. This is God's anointed king. So there's like this closeness between God himself and the king, but then in verse 7, therefore your God has anointed you. And I think this is part of like what Andrew was bringing up, that this is ultimately going to be applied to King Jesus. And so this is a messianic psalm. It's also a royal wedding psalm. There's not really any other psalms like this one in the way that it describes this. One of the questions that I had here is this psalm the answer to Psalm 44, verse 26? Do you remember when we looked at Psalm 44 last week about crying out to God for help, and it seems like God hasn't answered kept his promises? Look at Psalm 44, verse 26. Rise up, come to our help, redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love. And then what happens in Psalm 45? Does it sound like they have a king that's victorious and kind of answering the cries of Psalm 44? I just wonder if that's part of the flow of thought that we see between these two sections. I also wonder which kings in the Old Testament, that should say most, not Mose. Which kings in the Old Testament, Mose, closely resembles this psalm? Hezekiah, yeah. Hezekiah, you could imagine that one. What else? Joash?
Didn't David say something about my Lord? He was king, yet there was a higher king.
In Psalm 110? Yeah. Yeah, so it could be David, could be Solomon, could be Hezekiah, Jehoshaphat. There's like 5 kings after the kingdom divided that took the stuff that was in the temple that shouldn't have been there and threw it out. You guys realize that whenever the Israelites in the Old Testament, this is a little bit of a tangent, when the Israelites and the Judeans in the Old Testament, whenever they started worshiping false idols and they brought the idols to the temple, who were always the ones that took those idols out? They were kings. So when Jesus goes into Jerusalem and for his triumphal entry, and then he turns over the money tables and everything, and then a few verses later, the question that Jesus is asked is, by what authority are you doing these things? He's play acting the role of a king. He's assuming upon himself, this is what kings did. Whenever there was things in the temple that shouldn't be there, we threw it out. And so this king would have been, it reminds you of some of these kings that would have done things like that. But then I also had this, I had the question from, here we go. I had in verses 9 and 10, does he have other wives here? Is this talking about Solomon? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I couldn't figure that out exactly. All right, Anything else about these two questions? Yep.
Possible it's just the Messiah to come is describing someone who does not yet exist.
Yeah, so here, yes, I think ultimately he's talking about the Messiah, but there would be dim pictures of somebody like the Messiah that this could also, people could go, oh, is that who that's talking about? But those guys, if it's Josiah or Hezekiah, any of those guys, they ultimately failed, continuing to whet our appetite for the one that'll do this. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next question. What are you reminded of? And we've already said a couple things about this, but does this psalm remind you of anything else in the Bible? Make you make connections anywhere? Yeah, Ephesians 5 with the marriage stuff. Good. This made me think also of David's victories in 2 Samuel 8. He defeats Goliath, but then 2 Samuel 8, he defeats his enemies on all sides, and this king has been victorious as well. Of course, David ultimately wasn't the king that we're looking for, so we're looking for the one that will fulfill all of this. But in verse 5, going along with the victories, the arrows are sunk deep into the hearts of people. Does Jesus' teachings, are they kind of like arrows that sink into people's hearts and convict people? And the way that in the book of Joshua, that's the Old Testament book of conquest, where they killed people with swords and spears and arrows and all that kind of stuff. And then in the New Covenant, what's the New Covenant book of conquest? The book of Acts, where the sword of the Spirit is going out and conquering hearts. And every heart that's pierced by the gospel and then repents and comes to the Lord is conquered territory for the kingdom. Andrew already brought this one up, but verse 6 and 7 quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, applying all of this to Jesus. We've already talked about this as well, but we are of foreign descent and made into Jesus' bride. We got Ephesians 5 there. And then you have this dynastic succession in verse 16 that reminds you of David's promises that he was going to have a son that would reign on the throne forever. All right, anything else you guys want to say about what you're reminded of from this one? All right, let's talk then finally about what prayers we can make. Did you guys have any things that as you looked at this psalm, you go, you know what, I need to incorporate this or that into my prayers? Yeah, thankfulness that we've got a righteous king. We have the king that this psalm was ultimately looking forward to. And what a blessing of an era that we live in. And if these people had all this joy over this king, do we have joy over a greater king that we have in Jesus? What else?
Verse 6, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, a scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. Your love and righteousness and hate is therefore your God. And anointed, just reminding us who's in charge.
Yes.
That our king is superior to all, but also is welcoming to, combat that today the world thinks that the gospel teaches division. In reality, it's about a king.
Yes. Good. Good. What else?
It's not about like what you see, but it's your heart. It's about righteousness.
Yeah, like help me to have concern for character like this king. Like help him lead me in these ways. Erthel? Yes, good. Yeah, this chapter is very much like our connection to this king, and help me be attached and connected to that king. Good. Yeah. I also had, in verse 10, help me forget and forsake all past allegiances as I draw near to you, because if we're ultimately the bride of Christ, help me to forsake my past in any way that it might drag me down. And then just help me long for the day when Jesus and the church will be fully married, which goes back to the question that you had. And I think this is an appropriate lens to look at this. Anything else you guys want to say about this one? Yeah, Brian?
That our hearts would be overflowing with a pleasing theme like in verse 1, and that we would be ready to use our tongues to proclaim.
Yeah, good. Yeah, are we like the scribe or the sons of Korah in verse 1? Is our heart overflowing with a pleasing theme? Could we, are our tongues like the pen of a ready scribe? Could we go on in detail about how great of a king Jesus is? Or is that something that would be kind of hard for us to know how to talk about? And I think one of the prayers we could make from this is, make my heart so much like the heart of the sons of Korah that we could say, 17 sentences about this, and it would be distinct kind of sentences that are all beautiful, because this is how much we're in love with who he is and what he's done. Good. Anything else? Yeah, Rob?
Like the sons of Korah, are we able to proclaim that we will cause the Lord's name to be remembered throughout generations?
Yeah, good. Help us to raise up children that'll do that, and help us to be people that are proclaiming his name. Verse 16 starts to become a theme in these Psalms where God's name is going to be made known to the other nations. I think, we're going to have another verse like that in just a moment. I thought I saw another hand over here. Yeah, Daryl? Yes. And do you think that this continuation of the name of the king, one of the things that's really interesting in Psalms is how evangelistic the heart of David is and the heart of a lot of the writers of the Psalms are. Do you think that what the sons of Korah needed were like techniques on how to make people know about God? Or do you think they were so enraptured with how good God was that they just had to talk about it? And they didn't really need to. I'm not saying there's not time to talk about how to reach people with the gospel, but if our question is, well, I don't even know how to get a conversation started, well, okay, I don't want to be sounding like a jerk, but it might be that you're not as amazed with Jesus as you should be. Because if you were, you might talk about it then. Matt? All right, all right. All right, we have to move on to the next psalm. So the next one is Psalm 46, God is our refuge. This is where we get the famous verse, be still and know that I am God. But what does this mean in the context is what we will get to. But here's the summary of the psalm. God is depicted as a refuge and strength in trouble. It reassures believers that God provides security and peace. God's sovereignty over all nations is emphasized as it calls for stillness and trust in his power. It concludes with a reaffirmation that God is with his people as their fortress. All right, so you got God as a refuge in the first three verses. God is present with his city Zion. And then God is powerful in verses 8 through 11. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 46. This one's shorter than the one we just looked at. To the choir master of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth, a song. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose stream makes glad the city of God, the holy habitation of his Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. All right. Start out with our first question. What do you notice? Yeah, the whole thing is about God and like who he is, what he's done. And can you see how in Psalm 45 it's like the king's getting married and now he's like coming to Zion? Is maybe some of the flow of thought that we're seeing here. What else do you guys see? Yep.
There's multiple images of how God is stronger than the earth, than all the natural catastrophes.
Yes. Yeah, like stronger than like earthquake. Like all these things that we tremble at, God is above all of that. There's these three declarations in verse 1. Verse 1, God is our refuge. Verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. And then verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. So like this powerful God is the one that is with them, and if he's with them, then what do they have to fear? But there's these nations fighting, and that sounds kind of scary, but if God's with you, then there's nothing to be ultimately scared of. But going along with what Caden said, nature is brought up in verses 1 through 3, God being above all these things in nature. And then he shifts to kind of like the nations in verses 4 through 11. And now if God is above all the powerful things in nature, it would stand to reason that he would be above all the powerful nations in the world as well. All right, what else do you guys see here? Yep.
Verse 4, there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. Reminds me of Revelation 22.
Yes.
The river of life. In verse 2 it says, through the middle of the street of the city, also on either side of the river, the tree of life. And talks about the fruit and, the river.
Yep. Yeah, this river that makes glad sounds like it's referring to what should have been in the Garden of Eden and then is ultimately recaptured in the new heavens, new earth. What else you guys see? Yep. Ye- Yes. Yeah, it almost seems contradictory that in verse 8, come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. Oh, so he's brought desolations. Okay, thanks God. But verse 9, he makes wars cease. What? He can bring destruction if he needs to, and ultimately all of that leads to the ceasing of wars. Is there going to be a final judgment day where there is justice? But after that, is there going to be peace? Yes. Good. What else do you guys see here? I'm shocked in verse 3. Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at us, at its swelling, you got all of these things happening, and the writer seems to still have this calmness and peace about him. And in verses 3 and 4, there's these contrasting rivers. There's a river that destroys in verse 3, but then there's this river that makes glad in verse 4. And just God's overall power over the nations. In the next few months, are we all going to be worried if North Korea's got more nukes? And are we going to be worried about Russia this, and Russia's always the bad guy, and Ukraine this and that, and all this? Are we going to be taught by the news that we need to be worried about everything that's happening with the nations? Are those going to be the emotions that are assigned to us by the news to keep us afraid of things? And then all the while, readers of the Psalms will go, hey, you know what? There's a lot of things that I don't know what's going on in this world, but I know the God who's over it all. Yeah.
The purpose of news is still advertising.
Right.
Sensationalism.
They need to keep us afraid so that we're addicted to keep watching them, so they keep making money off of the ads.
And the purpose of this is to calm us and put confidence in our God.
Yes.
And I can't help but when we talk about the waters roar and be troubled, I think going back to Noah. Because there would be a person right there hearing that water, most people would be scared to death. But you built this ark and you have confidence in your God.
Yep.
And that's a good example for us.
Yeah, good. Good. How many of you people that have been around for a longer amount of time, like, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, 60s, have you guys always been taught that you need to be afraid of something that's going to kill you in the next 8 months? Has that been like a common thing? Can anybody help us with this? It's more so now? But it's always existed? Like, we're going to die from the world freezing, and now we're going to die from the world getting too warm. Yeah, John? Going under the desks? Those desks were nuke proof.
But Eric, going back to what you said, in the 70s, we got to Ice Age.
Right.
We got Ice Age coming. And we're going to run out of gas in 10 years. We're going to run out of natural gas in 20 years. And coal's not going to last very long. And we heard all that. And then in the 80s started the global warming thing.
Right.
If it's not something, it's always something.
Right.
Here we got consistency and confidence in our God.
Yes. Yeah, and whether it's natural disasters in the first few verses or things happening in nations, calamities with other nations, we've got a God that's present and powerful, and he's always our refuge. Yes. Yep.
Anytime you look through the Bible, God is always taking care of all people.
Yes. Yep. Good. What else? Yep.
Well, we're to be still. When Jesus calmed the storm, it was done, it was still. Meaning, relax, let things go, surrender our lives to God, and release the striving and the hostility that's all around us. For me, it was Sputnik when I was in grade school.
Yeah. Yeah, Sputnik, they were the first to get to the moon or whatever, put the thing up there in the 50s. Yeah?
Yeah, it seems like his solution or remedy to the calamity that's surrounding them is to be still, which seems a little bit counterintuitive to what we would say is the solution to the problem. But you kind of see that idea in Exodus 14. I think that's what he's alluding to.
I will fight for you, yeah.
Yeah, just be still when the Red Sea is being parted, and a whole nation that was the greatest nation that anybody had ever seen at that time was being swallowed up in the water. They just had to be still. And I think that's the solution that he's describing here, which sounds so countercultural.
Yes.
And the reason why you can be still is in verse 11, when he says that the Lord is my fortress, or God is our fortress, the Lord of hosts is with us. And when you talk about the Lord of hosts, you're talking about an army, you're talking about a great amount of people, a host of heaven.
Yes.
Is what you're describing there.
There's one person that renders the Lord of hosts as the it's in the Message. It's not a translation, it's an interpretation. But I like the way that the Message talks about the Lord of hosts. It calls him the Lord of the angel armies. And like that's exactly what that's talking about. He's got these angelic beings that he can just move and have do whatever he wants them to do. Daryl?
Back in the 70s when I was young, my dad, one of the things that he taught us, of course, was going to church and believing in the Bible. A lot of the stuff that we hear now, we never seen before. We was lucky if we had 2 channels of TV having things, so now we have TV.
Well, now we can figure out if we want to be right-wing worried or left-wing worried.
But he had a saying, he actually found a bumper sticker, hopefully I can remember exactly right, but it said, don't believe everything you hear, read for yourself. In other words, think for yourself.
Right, yeah.
Just don't listen to somebody else.
Well, and when we hear about nations doing all these things, and what's the last thing that we think about doing? It's verse 10. Be still and know that I am the Lord, that I am God. There's all kinds of distractions that can make us forget that God is everything that this psalm is talking about. And I think the being still means quit looking at the wind and the waves and gaze at Jesus so that you don't start sinking. Some of the things I wonder if this psalm is continuing to answer the cries of Psalm 44 about God, you haven't kept your promises, so on and so forth. The next 2 psalms after Psalm 44 are saying like the opposite. Not that they're contradicting themselves, but the experience of the writers have shifted, which is what should happen when we talk to the Lord about things. What is Alamoth in the title? I don't know. Some people think that's talking about it's for the soprano voices. Not sure. But what does be still and know that I am God mean in the context? And I think we've kind of talked about that. But relax your grip on everything that you're trying to grab in this life. You're worried about this, you're worried about that, you're speaking evil of rulers, you're trying to manipulate certain. Just be still and look at God. He's in control of everything. That doesn't mean that if you got some kind of sin that you need to overcome, that you I'll just not do anything. No, that's not the point. It's looking at big picture things in the world that people worry about. Just calm down. Just relax. Just take Psalm 46 daily in the morning. I don't know. Anything else you guys want to say about what you wonder from this? Yep.
This translation says, cease striving.
Yeah. Instead of be still. Yeah, cease striving. Why are you guys fighting each other? You're trying to get each other's resources. Somebody's upset that the Duke of Ferdinand was killed, and and so we're just gonna kill each other all the time. World War I, they didn't call it World War I at the time because they weren't anticipating a sequel. But then after World War, it's like, what would this have meant back then? I don't know. Are there some wars that are righteous today? I don't know. I'm not saying I know the answer to anything, but I know that this says there's a lot of striving that happens that shouldn't happen. Ryan? At least for the nation of Israel, God would come to literally defend them. And so I can find instances in the Old Testament where that would be the case. What it would mean for us today would I at least mean ultimately all war will cease.
So in a literal sense, like if you take away my bow, you take away my spear, you take away my chariot, you take away my entire military.
Yes.
And I think when he says, hey, be still, it's probably because they were upset, like, God, what are you doing? Like, you just destroyed our military and our defense tactics, and now we have nothing.
Yeah, so just quit trying to make more. Stop it. Yeah. Good. All right. Anything you're reminded of from this? We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to throw some of mine up quick. The hymn "A Mighty Fortress" by Martin Luther I really like the hymn, but it's the notes kind of go, and so it's harder to sing. But it's a really beautiful song, and it comes from this hymn. I just remember camping when I was in Boy Scouts, and there was times where we had to stay in storm shelters that were all made of like concrete with reinforced titanium. I don't remember what it was. But if you went in the storm shelter, you were fine. And that's kind of the imagery. If you're in your tent, you're probably going to die. But if you go into the storm shelter, you're going to be okay. And God is pictured as that. This is also one of the several Zion songs in the book of Psalms where it praises the city that God dwells in. And those are the references there. We already talked about the river. But anything else you guys want to say that you're reminded of from this psalm? Yep.
It just makes me think of all the examples we have in the Old Testament, whether it be the idea of the nature versus the nation, God ultimately being in charge. Whether it be like Ellar was talking about the flood or the Red Sea, Daniel in the lion.
Yep.
All these examples that we have of God is ultimately in charge of, all of that.
Yes, and with Daniel in the lion's den, what was on the flags of the Babylonian Empire? What was their symbol? We have the eagle. What did the Babylonians have as their symbol? Lions. Have you ever thought about how much of a punch in the face of the Babylonian power it is that God shut the mouths of lions? Like those are our things. That's our lethal injection, but it's not really an injection. Like it just kind of eats you alive. And God's more powerful than our flag. And so you're just reminded of all these times that God shows his power. And then we have to ask ourselves, why am I so worried? It's because the news keeps telling me to be, and I'm not thinking enough about what God says about this stuff. Yeah, Dave?
It's not just his strength, he does all this stuff with just words.
He does what?
He does all these things with just speaking.
Yeah, yes.
And it's so effortless for him.
Yes. Yep, good. So what prayers then can we make from this one? I think one of them is already kind of obvious. Help me not fear what the nations do, knowing that you're there to help, you're a refuge. Yep.
I think that, like, verse, where it says, know that I'm God, verse 8, behold the works of the Lord. I think he wants us to look back in history and in our own lives.
Yes.
That he has saved or helped us, so that when we encounter a new thing that's scary, a giant in the land, that, he wants us to look back and see all the ways that he saved us, so that we can have confidence in this scary moment.
Yeah, God's let me go through scary moments up to this point, and I'm this many thousands of days old, and now I'm worried about tomorrow. No, remember what he's done in the past. He's going to take care of you. And even if you physically die, he's going to ultimately take care of you. So, you can see these Psalms are just so soothing. You see why why Paul in Ephesians 5 would say, don't get drunk with wine, be filled with the Spirit. Think about the Psalms. Like we don't need escapism. We need realism through the lens of God. And that helps us see everything the right way. Is any of this escapism? No. We're reminding ourselves that God is the one in control. So why do we need to dull ourselves? Why do we need escapism? We need to go to the Lord and know that he's the refuge. Yeah. Yeah.
We should always have confidence. And if we're failures, all humans are failures because we can't raise ourselves up on our own bootstraps. God does.
Yeah. Good. All right. So, Lord willing, next week, I think it's Psalm 47 to 49. And again, the material's back.